The old Mitchell place sat at the end of a gravel road that most folks in Hemlock Grove pretended didn't exist. On a raw November afternoon, with rain turning to sleet against the windshield of my truck, I finally understood why. The mansion loomed against a bruised sky, its dark stone walls streaked with a century of Ohio grime, its windows like the empty eyes of something that had died but refused to stop watching. I had driven 5 hours from Columbus, my hands gripping the steering wheel the whole way, my mind circling the same question that had haunted my own family for 3 generations. The Mitchells were my ancestors. My great-grandfather, Samuel Mitchell, built this house with his own 2 hands after the war, carving a life out of these wooded hills. But my grandmother, before she passed last spring, made me promise one thing. She said, "You find out why we never sat at the same table. You find out why the silence was the only thing we ever shared." Those were her last words to me, spoken with a terror that had nothing to do with dying. So I came. The wrought iron gate groaned open under my hands, its hinges stiff with rust and neglect. The gravel drive crunched beneath my boots, each step feeling heavier than the last. The air smelled of wet leaves, cold stone, and something else. Something faint and sweet, like flowers left too long in a closed room. A figure stood waiting on the wraparound porch, a man in a worn coat with a face as weathered as the house itself. His name was Eli, the caretaker, and he looked at me the way you look at a man about to step into a cage he cannot see. "You're Sam's boy," he said, not a question. I nodded. He stared at me for a long moment, then pulled a heavy iron key from his pocket. The lock turned with a sound like a bone cracking. "The family never ate together," he said, his voice low and steady. "For 70 years, in this house, no 2 Mitchells shared a meal. Not for holidays, not for funerals, not for anything. Your grandmother kept the tradition until the day she died." He pushed the door open, and a draft of cold air rushed out to meet me, carrying that same sweet, cloying scent. "You want to know why," he said. "Then you better start with the basement. But I warn you now. Some truths are heavy. Heavy enough to break a man clean in 2. Before I could answer, he pressed a small leather journal into my hand. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed, and on the first page, written in a woman's trembling hand, were the words, "*We did it to protect them.' But the price. Oh, the price was everything. I looked up to ask Eli what it meant, but the porch was empty. The front door stood open behind me, and the house waited in the dim light, its silence so deep I could hear my own heartbeat echoing off walls that had not known a family's laughter in over 70 years. I stepped inside, the floorboards groaning under my weight, and I knew, with a certainty that settled cold in my chest, that I had just crossed a line from which there was no return. The Mitchell family never ate together. And before this night was over, I would finally understand the terrible reason why the journal in my hands felt heavier than paper and ink had any right to feel. I stood in the grand foyer, my breath fogging in the cold air, and let my eyes adjust to the gloom. The house was a museum of forgotten things. A grandfather clock stood silent in the corner, its hands frozen at 11:47. Portraits lined the walls, men and women with my grandmother's eyes, all of them staring straight ahead with expressions that held no warmth, only a kind of weary resignation. I opened the journal again, flipping past the first page to a date scrawled in the upper corner. October 19, 1889. The same year my grandmother was born. The ink was faded but legible, the handwriting careful, as if the woman who wrote these words knew they would be read by someone who needed to understand. "Father says we must never question the arrangement," she had written. "He says the separate tables are our protection, our shield against what waits in the darkness beneath us. But I am 12 years old, and I am tired of eating alone. Last night, I crept down to the kitchen after everyone had gone to bed. I took bread and cheese from the pantry and sat at the long table in the dining hall. The one we never use. The one Father keeps covered in white sheets like a corpse waiting for burial. I ate in silence, and for a few moments, I felt almost whole. But then I heard it. A sound from below, like breathing. Slow. Patient. Waiting. I ran back to my room and did not sleep. I will never sit at that table again. I understand now. Some hungers are not meant to be shared. I closed the journal, my fingers numb against the cracked leather. The words echoed in my mind, the terror of a 12-year-old girl who had learned too young that her own family's love could not keep her safe. I looked around the foyer, seeing it now through her eyes. The grand staircase curving upward into shadows. The long hallway leading to the dining room she had described. The door beneath the stairs, narrow and unremarkable, that had to lead down to the basement. Eli's warning came back to me. Start with the basement. I walked toward the door, my footsteps loud in the silence. The handle was cold, colder than the air around it, and when I pulled it open, a draft rose up from below that smelled of damp earth and that same sweet, cloying scent I had noticed on the porch. I pulled a small flashlight from my coat pocket and clicked it on. The beam cut a narrow path down a set of stone steps, their edges worn smooth by generations of feet. I descended slowly, one hand on the cold stone wall, the other holding the light steady. The stairs went deeper than I expected, far deeper than a normal basement should go. The air grew heavier with each step, pressing against my ears, and the sweet smell grew stronger until it was almost suffocating. At the bottom, the stairs opened into a room that made my stomach drop. It was not a basement. It was a chamber, carved from the bedrock beneath the house, its walls lined with shelves that held jars and bottles and things I did not want to name. But what held my attention was the table. It sat in the center of the room, a long oak table scarred with deep grooves and dark stains. Around it were 5 chairs, each one different, as if they had been gathered from different rooms and brought here for a purpose I could not yet understand. The table was set. Plates, cups, utensils, all arranged as if someone had expected a meal. But the food had long since turned to dust, and the cups held only the residue of something thick and red that had dried to a black crust. I stepped closer, my flashlight beam trembling across the surface. In the center of the table lay another journal, smaller than the first, its cover bound in leather that had once been brown but was now almost black. I reached for it, my hand shaking, and as my fingers touched the cover, I heard it. A sound from the shadows at the far end of the room. Slow. Patient. Waiting. Just like the 12-year-old girl had written. It was breathing. Something was breathing in the darkness with me. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs, the flashlight beam frozen on the journal in my hand. The breathing did not stop. It was deep and slow, the rhythm of something that had been waiting for a very, very long time. Had not been touched in decades. I collapsed into a chair by the cold fireplace and opened the second journal, my hands still trembling, my breath still ragged. The handwriting was different. Stronger, more deliberate, but the same trembling fear bled through every word. My name is Margaret Mitchell, the first entry read. And if you are reading this, you are my blood. You are the one who has come to understand why we could never be a family like others. I am sorry. I am so sorry for what I am about to tell you. But you deserve the truth. We were not always cursed. Once, we sat together. We laughed. We argued. We loved. But then my husband, Samuel, made a choice. A choice born of desperation and love, and it doomed us all. He found something in these hills. Something old. Something that offered him prosperity, success, everything he had ever wanted. And all it asked in return was a small thing. A single meal. 1 meal a year, shared together, just the 5 of us. But he did not understand what he was inviting to the table. The first year, we sat down as a family, and it came. It sat with us, in the empty chair, and it ate. And when the meal was over, it looked at us with eyes that held no light, and it smiled. It said, "Now you are mine. And every meal you share, I will take a little more. Until there is nothing left but hunger." We tried to leave. We tried to run. But it was already inside us, inside this house, woven into the very stones. The only way to starve it, the only way to keep it from consuming us all, was to stop sharing meals. To eat alone. To let the hunger in it grow restless and weak. And so we did. For 70 years, we have done nothing but eat alone, live alone, die alone. because togetherness feeds it. And I will not let it have my children. I will not let it have you. I read the words again, my mind struggling to accept what they meant. The family never ate together because the act of sharing a meal was an invitation. An invitation to something that had been waiting in the darkness of these hills long before my great-grandfather ever set foot here. Something that fed on the simple, human act of breaking bread together. I looked up from the journal, my eyes falling on the portrait above the fireplace. A man and a woman, my great-grandparents, standing stiff and formal in their finest clothes. But behind them, in the corner of the painting, there was a fifth chair. And in that chair, a shape. Not quite solid. Not quite empty. Just a shadow in the shape of a person, watching. I heard the breathing again. Not from the basement this time, but from the room itself. From the shadows pooling in the corners, from the cold drafts that moved like fingers across the back of my neck. I was not alone in this house. I had never been alone. The Mitchell family never ate together. And now, after 70 years of silence, something had finally grown hungry enough to wake up. I sat in the library with Margaret Mitchell's journal pressed against my chest, her words burning into my memory like a brand. The portrait above the fireplace watched me, that shadow in the corner chair, and I could feel its attention like a weight pressing down on my shoulders. I needed more. I needed to understand what Samuel Mitchell had found in these hills, what bargain he had made, and whether there was any way to break it. I pushed myself out of the chair, my legs unsteady, and began searching the library shelves. Margaret had been meticulous. Her journal referenced other documents, letters, records that she had hidden throughout the house, evidence of the curse that she had gathered over a lifetime of isolation. I found the first one behind a row of law books, a thick envelope sealed with wax that crumbled at my touch. Inside were letters, dozens of them, exchanged between Samuel Mitchell and a man he called the deacon. The earliest letters were hopeful, almost giddy, as Samuel described the success of his business, the growth of his land, the admiration of the town. But as the years passed, the tone shifted. Desperation crept in. Fear. Then horror. The deacon warned me there would be a price, Samuel wrote in one letter dated 1885. But he did not tell me it would be my children. He did not tell me it would sit at our table and watch us with those eyes. I have tried to send it back. I have tried to break the bargain. But it only laughs and says the bargain was sealed with blood and bread. And now it will feast until there is nothing left. I set the letters aside and kept searching. Behind a loose brick in the fireplace, I found a key, small and brass, its teeth worn smooth with age. It did not fit any lock I had seen in the house, but I knew where it belonged. The dining room. The one Margaret had written about, the long table she had eaten at alone as a child, the one that had been covered in white sheets for 70 years. I left the library and walked down the long hallway, the floorboards creaking under each step. The door to the dining room was at the end, a heavy oak door with iron fittings that had turned black with age. The key slid into the lock with a soft click, and I turned it slowly, feeling the mechanism release with a groan. The door swung open, and I stepped inside. The room was vast, far larger than any dining room needed to be, with a ceiling that disappeared into shadow. The long table sat in the center, still draped in white sheets, the chairs around it standing like mourners at a funeral. But it was not the table that drew my eye. It was the wall. The far wall was covered in photographs. Dozens of them, framed and hanging in neat rows, each one showing the same scene. A family gathered around this table. A meal laid out before them. And in every photograph, the same shape, the same shadow, the same empty chair. But the shadows were not empty anymore. In the photographs, I could see it. A figure, tall and thin, its face a pale blur, its hands resting on the table before an empty plate. It was there in every image, growing clearer as the years progressed, as the family grew more desperate, as the curse tightened its hold on them. I moved closer, my eyes scanning the dates beneath each frame. 1853, 1854. 1855, every year, a photograph. Every year, the same table. The same shadow. Until 1889. The photograph from that year was different. The family was still there, Samuel and Margaret, their 5 children. But they were not sitting at the table. They were standing, huddled together, their faces pale with terror. And the shadow was not in the chair. It was standing behind them, its hands on their shoulders, its face turned toward the camera as if it knew someone would be looking. Someone like me. I stumbled back from the wall, my heart hammering, my breath coming in short gasps. The photographs were not just records. They were warnings. They were proof that the curse was not a story, not a legend, but a living, breathing horror that had fed on my family for over a century. I turned to leave, to get out of this room, out of this house, to run back to my truck and drive until I forgot what I had seen. But the door was closed. I did not close it. The brass key was still in my hand, but the lock was not the kind that could close on its own. I pulled on the handle, but it would not budge. I pulled harder, throwing my weight against it, but the door held firm. And then I heard it. The scrape of a chair. I turned slowly, my eyes moving to the table. The white sheets were still draped over it, but one of the chairs had moved. It was pulled out from the table, turned slightly, as if someone had just risen from it. As if someone had been sitting there, watching me read Margaret's words, watching me look at the photographs, watching me realize the truth. The air in the room grew cold, so cold I could see my breath, and the sweet smell returned, cloying and thick, filling my lungs until I wanted to gag. A whisper came from the shadows at the far end of the table. Soft. Low. The voice of something that had been waiting for a very, very long time. You are Mitchell Blood. You carry the bargain in your veins. Sit with me. Share a meal. Feed me, as your family has fed me for generations. I shook my head, my throat too tight to speak. The whisper came again, closer this time, as if the speaker had moved around the table without making a sound. Your grandmother knew. She kept the silence. She starved me. And I have been so hungry. So hungry for so long. But you came. You opened the door. You read the words. And now I can taste you. I can taste the Mitchell blood in your veins, warm and sweet, calling me home. I felt something brush against my arm, cold and insubstantial, like the touch of a hand made of winter air. I jerked away, my back hitting the door, and the whisper laughed. A sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. You cannot run. You are bound to this house, to this bargain, to me. Your great-grandfather gave me his family. He gave me his children. And now you are here, and I am hungry, and we will dine together. As family should. I closed my eyes, my mind racing, searching for something, anything, that could save me. And then I remembered Margaret's words. The final entry in her journal. The one I had not read. I had stopped at the warning, too terrified to go further. But there was more. There was always more. I pulled the journal from my coat pocket, my fingers fumbling with the pages, and found the last entry. Margaret's handwriting was shaky now, weak with age and fear, but the words were clear. There is a way to break it. I found it in the deacon's letters, buried in his rambling words about sacrifice and blood. The bargain was sealed with a meal. It can be broken with a meal. But not any meal. A meal of truth. A meal where the family gathers, not to feed the hunger, but to starve it. To sit together and speak the words it has kept hidden. To name it. To know it. To refuse it. If you are reading this, you are the one. You are the Mitchell who will sit at the table, not to feed it, but to free us. I am sorry I could not be brave enough to do it myself. But I am old now, and my time is passing. Be brave for me. Be brave for all of us. And when you sit down to eat, remember. It is not the food that matters. It is the truth. Tell the truth. And the hunger will end. I read the words twice, 3 times, until they were burned into my mind. The whisper had grown quiet, waiting, watching. I could feel it in the room with me, a presence that filled every shadow, that pressed against my skin like cold water. I took a breath, steadying myself, and I walked to the table. I pulled out a chair, the one at the head, the one that had been empty in every photograph. And I sat down. The sheets were cold beneath my hands, the wood of the table hard and unyielding. I reached up and pulled the white cloth away, letting it fall to the floor. The table beneath was scarred, stained, its surface marked with grooves and burns and dark spots that I did not want to think about. But in the center, carved into the wood, were words. The same words from the first page of Margaret's journal. We did it to protect them. But the price. Oh, the price was everything. I placed my hands flat on the table, feeling the grooves beneath my fingers, and I began to speak. I told the truth. I told it about Samuel Mitchell, a man who wanted more than he had, who made a bargain with something he did not understand. I told it about Margaret, a mother who watched her children grow up in silence, who ate alone for 70 years to keep them safe. I told it about my grandmother, who passed the fear down like an heirloom, who died without ever knowing a family meal. I told it about myself, about the emptiness I had always felt, the longing for something I could not name, the hunger that had driven me here. The room grew colder with each word, the shadows pressing closer, the whisper rising into a hiss of rage. Stop. You cannot undo what was done. The bargain was sealed with blood and bread. It cannot be broken. But I did not stop. I told the truth about the photographs on the wall, about the shadow that had grown clearer each year, about the fear that had fed it more than any meal ever could. I told the truth about the chair that was never empty, about the presence that had waited in the darkness of this house for over a century, hungry and patient and cruel. And as I spoke, something changed. The cold began to fade. The shadows began to pull back, retreating from the table, retreating from me. The whisper became a scream, high and thin, a sound of pure fury. You are Mitchell blood. You are mine. You are mine. I pushed back from the table, standing tall, my hands still flat on the scarred wood. I looked at the empty chair at the far end, the one that had been waiting for a meal for 70 years. And I said the final truth, the one Margaret had hidden in her journal, the one that could break the bargain forever. You are not my family. You were never my family. You were hunger wearing a mask. And I am done feeding you. The silence that followed was absolute. The scream stopped. The cold vanished. The shadows pulled back to the corners, ordinary shadows again, harmless and still. I stood there for a long moment, my heart pounding, my hands trembling, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. The house was quiet. Truly quiet, for the first time since I had stepped through the door. I walked to the wall of photographs and looked at them one last time. In every frame, the shadow was gone. The chair was empty. The family sat alone, pale and frightened, but free. I took the photographs down, one by one, and stacked them on the table. I would take them with me when I left. They were proof. Proof of the silence, the fear, the sacrifice. But they were also proof that it was over. I walked out of the dining room, through the foyer, and out the front door. The morning sun was rising over the hills, pale and gold, cutting through the last traces of mist. Eli was standing by my truck, his weathered face unreadable. He looked at me for a long moment, then nodded once, slow and deliberate. You broke it, he said. It was not a question. I nodded. She told you how. I looked back at the house, at the dark stone walls and the empty windows, and for the first time, it looked like just a house. Old. Tired. But not hungry. Margaret Mitchell, I said. She was braver than she knew. Eli smiled, a sad, small thing, and opened the door of my truck for me. You coming back? I thought about the photographs in my arms, the journals in my coat, the truth I had carried here and the truth I would carry home. No, I said. There's nothing left for me here. Except the silence. And I've had enough of that to last a lifetime. I climbed into the truck and started the engine. As I pulled away, the gravel crunching under the tires, I saw Eli walk back toward the house. He paused at the door, his hand on the frame, and for a moment, I thought I saw him bow his head, as if in thanks or in farewell. Then he stepped inside, and the door closed behind him. I drove through Hemlock Grove without stopping, past the church and the general store and the rows of quiet houses. People were starting their day, opening curtains, stepping out for morning paper. They did not look at me. They did not know what had happened at the Mitchell place. They did not know that a family had finally broken a bargain that should never have been made. I did not stop until I was miles away, the town a smudge in my rearview mirror, the hills fading into the morning light. I pulled over and sat there, the engine idling, the photographs and journals on the passenger seat beside me. My grandmother's face came back to me, her last words, the fear in her eyes. I understood now. The silence was not a punishment. It was a gift. It was 70 years of sacrifice, a family giving up the one thing that made them a family to keep each other safe. And now it was over. I could sit at a table with my own children, my own grandchildren, and share a meal without fear. I could break bread and laugh and argue and love, and the only shadow at the table would be the one cast by the afternoon sun. I looked at the photographs one more time, at the faces of people I never knew but would never forget. Margaret. Samuel. The children who grew up in silence. They were free now. They had been free for a long time. They were just waiting for someone to be brave enough to sit at the table and tell the truth. I put the truck in gear and pulled back onto the road, heading home. The sun was warm on my face, the wind through the window carrying the smell of autumn leaves and clean air. Behind me, the Mitchell place stood empty on its hill, its windows dark, its walls silent. But it was just a house now. Just wood and stone and memory. And somewhere, in a place that was not a place, a family was sitting down to a meal together for the first time in over a century. They were laughing. They were arguing. They were loving. And for the first time, there was room for everyone at the table.